Take a deep breath, exhale, and join us for this episode of Hope Out of the Darkness.
Shelley Pavlis is a non-professional learning to navigate the world of suicide prevention. As a volunteer of the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention in Orange County, California, she chats with people who, like her, are affected by suicide. Hear their real-life stories, learn how they keep living life to the fullest, and find out what can be done to stop suicide. Join the conversation with fellow AFSP volunteers and mental health professionals, all of whom have their own stories about suicide. Let's find hope out of the darkness.
Hello, thank you so much for joining us today. I'm Shelley Pavlis, your host, and today my special guest is Michael Puldy, and I just want to say hello. Thank you so much for joining us, Michael.
Thanks, Shell. Thanks for having me on today.
Absolutely. So let me tell you a little bit about Michael's background and why I'm so interested to talk to him today. He has a really diverse background. He actually is CEO of his own company, Michael Resiliency Partners, which handles, for business, it handles risk mitigation and management. Basically, very niche problem solving. Is that a good way to describe it, maybe, Michael?
Absolutely. I work with companies to help them mitigate business risk and ideally avoid risk and avoid crisis before it happens.
Perfect. And then in addition to that, he is a podcast host. He is a writer, photographer. We'll talk about all that in a minute. He travels. He's a travel expert. He's actually visited all 50 states, 50 or more countries. He has 2 books about travel, and the first one is Millennial's Guide to Business Travel, Lessons for the Next Generation of Road Warriors, which to me is pretty interesting because it's about business travel, but yet enjoying the journey while you're traveling. And then tell me about your most recent book, because this I love this concept.
So my recent book, it just came out a couple of weeks ago. It's called Himalaya Memories. And in 2012 and 2013, I was living in Asia, and I spent some time in Nepal and Bhutan. And during those 2 experiences, which was fantastic, an amazing experience, 2 different types of adventures, even though Bhutan and Nepal are physically right next to each other and both in the Himalayas, completely different cultures, different environments. And from that book, from those travels, I wanted to create a photography essay of my adventures. And so Himalaya Memories is the offshoot of those journeys.
Amazing. And of course, we'll drop all of Michael's information and links to the books in the show notes so that you'll have access to that and you can reach out to Michael and get more information and his books. And the main reason Michael is here today is because he lost his wife to suicide, and he now helps support those who have losses and have survived loss from suicide. So I want to get into that discussion with you, Michael. I know that it's going to be really, really helpful for a lot of our listeners. If you would share a little bit about your story about the loss of your wife, and I'm very, very sorry for her loss. And while you tell your story, if you wouldn't mind touching upon how has grieving evolved for you over the years?
Well, I lost my first wife in 2009.
Okay.
And so 12 years ago. And it was, as in most people's cases, I mean, a lot of us who have lost someone to suicide, you always go back and say, why didn't I see that? I should have known. And the reality for me, which unfortunately is very, very typical, is my wife was depressed. She was experiencing challenges with her life. She was seeing a therapist. She was on medicine, antidepressant medicine. And quite frankly, it was one of those, it's not going to happen to me. In fact, I even would ask her, are you considering taking your life? And she would tell me no. And then one day she did. And it was a complete shock. I was traveling. I received a phone call from the coroner in the city of Boulder, where I lived at the time, Boulder, Colorado. And you're in shock. And so anyway, so I immediately got on a plane. Two of my children were in high school. Fortunately, a good friend of ours took them in until I could get home. One of my sons was in college at Arizona State, so I had to fly him in. And so it was really one of those days that I will never, ever forget, as I was on the eastern part of the United States, flying back to Colorado, having my children, making sure that they're safe, communicating to our family and close friends what had happened. And I was sobbing the entire flight back home, and surprisingly, no one ever asked me any questions about what was going on. But anyway, so I get back home, and I remember circling with my three children, and it was probably about 1 a.m. by this time, and I told them very succinctly, one, this is not their fault. Two, there's nothing that they could have done, even though they will be thinking about things they could have done. And it's very important for us to get through this together. And that was the start of this incredible journey that, quite frankly, I am still on.
We want to take a quick break and recognize that today's podcast episode may not be appropriate for everyone. If you are in crisis or know someone who is, please call the Suicide Lifeline at 1-800-273-8255 or text the word HELP to 741-741. And of course, if you feel you or someone you're with are in danger or experiencing a medical emergency, call 911.
It seems like you instinctually knew how to react and how to support your children. Was that just innate? Because a lot of people don't know what to do.
Well, I would love to say that it was pure intuition on my part, but unfortunately, it was something that I learned. My mother actually battled with depression in her life, and she was bipolar. And
Okay.
As a teenager, I witnessed her go through a complete mental breakdown, which always impacted me. Through my life, I battled with various periods of depression. I won't say significant, but for me they were, and it was enough that I needed to see a therapist on my own. And so I, through my life leading up to this point, when my wife passed away, I had kind of dipped my toe in and out of this discussion and discipline of mental depression and suicide. I had lost friends to suicide, but I never thought it would be something that would really closely touch my life until then. And so fortunately for me and for my children, when something did happen to us, I did have a certain amount of muscle memory, so to speak, that said, these are the things that I need to be doing. I was I was already in therapy because trying to help my wife deal with her challenges, but I put my children into therapy right away. Within 72 hours, I think, they were in front of a child psychologist, all three of them.
Wow, that's amazing.
And I required them all to go at least a year before they could make their own decisions on whether or not to proceed. And quite frankly, we'll fast forward a little bit, that was the best thing I could have ever done, because it helped them work through a lot of their issues. Two of my three children continued it long past 1 year.
Wow. Yeah, that's great.
Yeah, but it really, I think the other thing that really helped, and I kind of, it was dark humor, but I joked about it at the time, at the very beginning, that I was dealing with my own crisis. And as you mentioned earlier, one of the things that I've done throughout my career is manage crisis and incident management, a lot in the technology space, but also in business world, how businesses deal with crisis and outages and bad things that happen, which we all know bad things happen in business all the time. I mean, how many times have we gone into a store or a bank and we're met with, oh, sorry, our computers are down, we can't help you.
Right.
Or 3 hours on the wait at a call center to get a problem resolved, or the problems with our cable provider. Okay,
times.
well, so that's what I do for a living, is I work with companies to help them mitigate and find ways that they can avoid crisis, or when crisis happens, how they can manage through that efficiently as possible to help them with their clients and their business. And so quite frankly, from my point of view, I was like, okay, I'm going through my own crisis. What are the things I need to do? And using those skills is really how I approached my own situation. And essentially what that means is I gathered a team of people to help me through this problem. And I made sure that I allowed myself to be vulnerable to my children and to my closest friends. And I did not try, although I did at the beginning, but I did not try to suppress my feelings of grief and anger and all these issues that you go through when you lose a loved one, much less losing a loved one to suicide.
Yeah, it sounds like your business background, even though it was your personal life, you applied, you treated it the same, which it was. I think it sounds like you were afforded a little bit of a different. You had the skills already, or a lot.
I had a head start.
Okay, a better way to put it. And you're right. No one is prepared for. No one thinks it will happen to them. So, did your relationship with your boys change then, from before your wife died to after and then now? How? Well,
my relationship with my children has like with most adults. I mean, parents, it changes as they grow up. I mean, pretty much by the time they're 13 or 14, we all realize that they know everything and we know nothing, as they tell us. And so, at the time of my first wife's death, our three boys were 13, 17, and 19. So as I said, one was in college, one was a freshman in high school, and so two of them pretty much within a few months or the middle son was out of the house. So my relationship with my youngest son probably changed the most, because it was really the two of us for many years together, while the two older brothers were at college. And so of course, I would speak to my older children regularly on the phone, and one of them lived out of state, so I'd make a few trips a year to go visit him, and even when I would go down there and he was seeing a therapist in Arizona, when I would go down there, we would all meet the therapist together.
Okay.
But the relationship with my youngest son, Nathan, probably changed the most because it was just the two of us. And we used to joke it was like our fraternity house between the two of us. And there was definitely moments that you could tell it was definitely lacking the mom influence. Although I tried to keep the house the same and did things like I brought in a housekeeper, which was like, I don't need a housekeeper. Why would I do that? But I was effectively told to do that. There was a number of moms that really circled the wagons, and they were part of my team to help me take care of my youngest son. And between me and the neighborhood moms, we all banded together and helped get him through the situation. So I think my relationship with my youngest son gravitated the most, and it became, we both became very, very close because I was traveling, as you mentioned. I travel a lot. I travel a lot for work. I traveled personally, but then I was traveling a lot for work because I had to continue my job, and so I'd have people staying at the house. When I would go away for 3 or 4 days, and until Nathan got old enough where I did not have to have someone in the house with him. So he effectively, between the two of us, we would tag team to take care of the house and take care of the animals and things you think about that go wrong when you are a parent that you just handle, like the garage door won't open.
Right.
Because the spring breaks. Okay, well, I'm in New York. How am I going? I can't fix that. So Nathan, let's figure out a way that the two of us can get this problem solved. And sometimes the problem just waited till I got home. But those would be kind of the things that the two of us would try to work through. And it became, not just father and son, but because of the emotional elements of, we'd be watching a movie and both of us would just start crying. Because of just the issues around Nathan's mom's death, and the emotions were really raw. So a lot of open communications and a lot of visibility in my vulnerability to the effect. I've had a number of interesting conversations with therapists. And I would tell them the stories of me crying or me being openly vulnerable and letting my children understand some of the pressures that I was going through, rather than being the macho dad that, hey, this problem is not affecting me at all. And I think looking back, what kind of pushed that along is I tried to keep it in, and I tried to be the strong, standing father, but the wave of emotions and grief and sorrow inside me, I just, at some point, and it wasn't long, it was probably maybe only 3 or 4 months after Anne's death, I couldn't hold it in anymore.
Sure.
And looking back later and talking to my sons later, they actually told me it helped them realize that, one, it was okay for them to physically display and disclose their emotional grief and challenges, but to recognize that by sharing it together, it actually made them stronger, and it made them feel much more as part of the team or connected, because they're like, wow, Dad's leaning on me to help him get to a place of strength where he can then help me again.
Nice. It must not have been easy to have to bring effectively strangers into your inner circle immediately as part of your team.
It was so hard. Absolutely. It was very uncomfortable.
Yeah.
Often, and again, you don't always recognize this, but when you have a devastation event like this, the community gets together, family and friends fly in. There's a lot of support. And then after a couple weeks, a month, 3 months, in my case, it was about 2 to 3 months, everyone's gone.
Unfortunately, that is what tends to happen.
Everyone goes back to their life. And I had really, at that point, I had only a small handful of people that stuck with me. And some of them were very close friends that I had known forever. And then some of them were people that I barely knew who showed up.
Wow.
And were really, really there. And then, of course, there are people that you expect to be there that disappear.
Yes. Looking back at that time, what is something that you would have changed about how you handled the whole situation?
Well, back in 2009, and again, I was living in Colorado at the time, and if there was an AFSP, if there was a D.D. Hirsch, I couldn't find him. It was very difficult. In Colorado, there was an organization called Heartbeat.
Okay.
That provided suicide support, and it was group therapy, and I went to a few sessions, but it was like a room of 25 people. And so it was very uncomfortable. It was very interesting, but it was also very uncomfortable, me sharing my life with 25 strangers and then listening to them share theirs.
Sure.
And so it wasn't something that I felt good about. But one of the things that I wanted desperately, and I could not find, was I wanted to find someone like me, meaning a father of male boys, who had lost a spouse. And I wanted a guide. I wanted a path to help me, knowing that this person's example or this person's journey was not going to be mine, but I just wanted some guideposts.
Sure.
And I couldn't find it. And so I spent a lot of time. I found a few people that were close, but it just wasn't. I never really resonated with anyone. And so I think the biggest thing for me that I really, really would have wanted is something that you have today, I believe, with AFSP. In Los Angeles, it's D.D. Hirsch. But there are organizations around the United States and nationally that help people like myself who have lost someone to suicide, whether it's a loved one or friend or relative or whatever, help them and can connect them to other people to get them the skills and get them the guidance and get them the perspective that back 12 years ago I couldn't find.
Yes, with AFSP, we have healing conversations, and they will, to the best of their abilities, pair a lost survivor with someone who has had a similar loss and has experience. So with D.D. Hirsch, tell us a little bit more about their program and your involvement in volunteering with them and how you've been able to support others.
So at D.D. Hirsch, the program's called Survivors After Suicide. And when I moved to Los Angeles, I found out about the program and reached out to D.D. Hirsch and explained my personal situation and just quite frankly said, how can I help? And they were very happy. They were very happy to put me to work.
I bet.
And their program is they pair up a trained therapist with a survivor such as myself to help new people who are just starting their journey. And the programs that I've been involved with, it's usually somewhere around 8 people. They last 8 weeks, and for once a week for about an hour and a half to 2 hours, and we talk. In each meeting, there's usually a theme or a couple of questions to help guide the conversation. But the therapy sessions are spectacular. And the reason it makes them, I believe, so powerful is you're in this room with 8 people. And as I said, having a trained therapist there is really, I think that's very crucial. And you get these individuals who believe they're all by themselves, who they're the only person who's been through this, to meet other people where, while no two journeys are the same, there are a number of consistent elements that I believe helps people find solace and calm and helps them get them to the next step. So, for example, I could have stopped her. I could have, why didn't I see the signs? I have so much guilt about what happened. So it's these items that you would think that aren't, you're all by yourself. You realize there's others that have that. And it's amazing to watch the metamorphosis of these individuals as they come into this group feeling all alone, and then they exit the group, one, wishing that the group lasted much longer than 8 weeks, but also have a different demeanor about them of confidence and that they can get through this, that there is a way to get through this. Even though many of these people, it's still very raw. It's still, I just need to get through the day.
Yes. It is an incredibly powerful feeling to know that you are not alone.
Exactly. And it's this type of connection that I desperately looked for.
Yes.
For years.
I love that. That you are now able to provide that for people when you unfortunately did not have that available to you or hadn't been able to find it at the
exactly.
time.
I mean, an interesting example. I was in Australia, and this was probably 2012, 2013, so roughly 3-4 years later. And I met a woman who lost her husband to suicide at a party, and the conversation went something like this. She had lost her husband about 17 years earlier. She had remarried, but the conversation, the message that she made to me, which I thought was extremely powerful, was she said, I think of my husband every day, and I will never forget him or what happened. And it literally is one of those items that powers my life. And that comment was very powerful because what it really inspired in me is that this is not an end game scenario. When someone is impacted by the loss of suicide, it's then tattooed, becomes part of their DNA for the rest of their life. And I think it's very important to realize that if you can have that perspective, you can manage your life rather than trying to fight it, how to integrate it and interweave that terrible, terrible experience into a life that it's important for you to continue to live.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that perspective, because I think that many people really struggle with how to move forward and allowing the experience to become part of your life and figuring out how to move forward with it a part of your life is so important for everyone. So how I'm going to backtrack just a little bit. How what other resources that Dee Dee Hirsch has do you like and have you passed on to others?
Well, the Survivors After Suicide program is one of the biggest things. But Dee Dee Hirsch also has a number of potluck sessions. They have YouTube communication messages that go out. There's lots of reading material. But Dee Dee Hirsch's mission is much broader than just after suicide. They're very focused on preventing suicide.
Yes.
They run a major hotline service in the United States. When you call these, which I always thought was very interesting when I found this out, is when you call the 800 number, it's not like there's a call center with 500 people waiting to take your call.
Right.
You know, there's like a room of like 10, 20 people, and there's only a few of them around the United States. So it's not like there's this big, massive community out there helping you. It's actually very, I think it's a very probably stressed and underfunded system. But they spend a lot of time doing that, helping people try to prevent them from taking their life. And then one of the things I think is also very powerful is that they provide services where social services where if someone is lost to suicide, and they go in with the police, and they go in and talk to the families, and they help them through that those first few hours or that first day, which again, it's messy. It can be very messy, and it's not like there's a service, although you can call it, but most of the times you're stuck cleaning the mess. And it's very graphic. And I get into these group sessions and I talk to people where they explain some of these situations, and it's horrid. But unfortunately, it's the messy reality of what happens. And Dee Dee Hirsch helps people get through that piece of it.
Yeah, I'm very glad you mentioned that, because we don't talk about that aspect of it. And it's
let me give this example too, because again, I think it's very important for people to recognize how big a problem this really is I had a group session in the last year, 8 people, myself, the therapist, and 6 women, all women. Every one of them lost either a spouse, a child, or a parent due to a gunshot.
wow.
Everyone. And, you know, I'm not on the political spectrum of guns. I'm not going to say yay or nay on it, but I will say that if someone in the family is having mental challenges, get the guns out of the house.
Yep, agree 100%.
Every one of these women talked about, and they didn't own the guns. Either the person that took their life owned the gun, or it was the divorced, separated spouse that had the gun. And every one of those situations was no problem. He, meaning the person that took their life, you know, they would never do that. They're locked up. They're secure. Not a problem. They find a way. Absolutely, they find a way. Get the guns out of the house.
Yeah, one of the things that we mention in AFSP's Talk Saves Lives presentation program, which deals with answering some of the questions about looking for signs, is removing the means.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and actually, I am one of the new Project 2025 champions for Orange County area, and Project 2025 for AFSP is all about reducing the number of suicides by 20% by the year 2025. And the research that AFSP did showed that there are 4 areas to target in order to do that as quickly and as effectively as possible. And the number 1 area is firearms.
Yes.
So that's going to be a huge focus over the next few years in trying to get out the education and get out programs and assistance for those who are firearms owners, and help reduce the numbers. So yeah, thanks so much.
So it's so important, and I think the more people recognize the value in separating firearms from proximity of someone who's going through an emotional, challenging period. It cannot be understated.
Yes, yes. And before we started the podcast, you and I talked a little bit about my story, and a friend of my son's died by suicide. He was 17, and his father had given him, he was a police officer, sheriff, and his father had given him access to the gun safe in their property, feeling that he was an Eagle Scout, he was well trained, he knew how to use the weapon, and he may need it at some point for protection. Never, of course, ever thinking that that would be the cause of, that would be the means that his son would choose to end his life.
And unfortunately, that story is not uncommon.
Yeah. Yep. So, yeah, thanks for bringing that up. And I'll do everything I can to get the word out, to help get that word out. So now's about the time when I actually have our listener question. We ask our listeners to submit questions. Most of them are anonymous. Sometimes they'll record them. In this case, this question was actually emailed to me. What are some suggestions for speaking with children about the loss of a family member? How can I be honest about what happened?
Well, I think age of the child is very important. Obviously, you're going to have a conversation with a 15-year-old or 16-year-old much differently than if they're an 8-year-old or a 5-year-old.
Sure.
I would suggest a couple of things. First of all, I would, if you could find a child psychologist or a child grief counselor, I would encourage you to speak to them to help get some strategies on how to talk to them. I would also encourage you to, take stock in your relationship with your children, in terms of openness and really take a leap of faith that children are very resilient. They're much more resilient, I think, than adults.
Yes.
And I think that from my perspective and my approach was I was very honest with what happened. Now, I did not necessarily go into all the gruesome detail of everything that led up to my first wife's death, but I would let them know. I made sure that they were aware that mom was depressed. Mom was on medicine. Mom was with trained experts. But at the end of the day, mom took her life. And this was a decision that she made. And that our job now is to recognize that we love her, and we're going to continue to talk about her, and we're going to be angry at her for what she did because she left us. She did not have to do that. But we will rebuild our lives. And essentially that was the conversation that I had with my children as we worked through it. And you don't have to have the conversation all at one time, but I think it's something that's you continue to reinforce. So, for example, to this day, we continue to talk about mom. And we talk about what would mom say? What would mom want you to do? So she's still part of the conversation, even 12 years later. But again, looking back, we kept mom part of the conversation. Pictures of mom were in the house. There was no radical change to the house or the colors, or I would bring flowers into the house. So I would try to do things that mom would do. So I kept her integrated into our life. And to this day, as I said, we still talk to her, and we still make sure she's part of Thanksgiving and major holidays and weddings and all those things. So even though she died and she's physically no longer with us, we still love her, we still talk to her, and she's still part of our life.
Wonderful. Yeah, I love that you still celebrate her life in that way. And you did exactly what? So the president of our chapter is a licensed therapist, and recently at an outreach table, I actually had made a connection with a woman who, for a different reason, but ultimately she shared with me that her brother-in-law had 2 days prior to this event that we were both at, had taken his own life, and the family was very close. She had a 6-year-old boy, and she did not know how to talk to him. So I actually reached out to the president of our chapter, our therapist, and she got in contact with this woman, with this woman's permission, of course, and connected her with a contact at D.D. Hirsch for a consultation. And the information, of course, that you did everything that Linda suggested as well, which is be honest with the child in an age-appropriate way.
Right.
So, most important. I normally end the segment with asking people what they do to support their own mental health, but I'm going to switch things up a little bit because I think we've gotten a sense that maybe some of the things that you do, like travel, photography, work still, are some of the things that you do like to do, and that, helps contribute to your mental health. But what instead I specifically want to ask you is, what does hope look like to you?
Hope for me it's a future. I've always been fortunate to always be very optimistic about life and about my prospects going forward. And for me, hope is, as I said, it's a future. It's a happy future, which I know is reality is it's not always happy. And really, again, looking back to 2009 and really the first few subsequent years, it was really hard. It was really hard to have hope and really hard to think about a future. It was all really about just getting through the day.
Sure.
How can I just get through the day? And I think again, a lot of times people think, well, let me just get through the first year. Once you get through the first year, then things will be okay. But for me, it probably was more like 4 or 5 years before I felt that I had my own personal foundation intact, that I can have a significant amount of hope that my future would be positive and work out the way I wanted it to work out. But I think ultimately, again, for me, hope is that it will work out and there is a future. And if I continue to focus and do things that allow me to be grounded and take care of myself, and then take care of my kids and my family and my wife, then I will have that come to be.
That's a great message. Thank you so much, Michael, for sharing your story today. I know many of our listeners will be able to take away bits and pieces of what you've shared and hopefully be able to implement them into their specific situations. And we, as always, will pop all of the information, all the resources that we've discussed in the show notes so that you all can have access to them as well. Thank you again.
Thank you very much, Shell. Thank you for having me.
Appreciate it.
If you are in crisis or know someone who is, please call or text the Suicide Lifeline. You can find out how to reach the Lifeline by looking for the numbers in the show notes of every single episode. If it wasn't glaringly evident in today's episode, I'm not a mental health or suicide prevention professional, and this is not an official AFSP podcast. I am determined, however, to find a way to help stop suicide in my community and to support those affected by suicide.
Thanks for listening to Hope Out of the Darkness. To learn more about Shell, the American Foundation of Suicide Prevention, and how to submit listener questions to be answered on the show, visit hopeoutofthedarkness.com.